Hi, my name is Emily Coots, and today I'm going to be talking about autism. For some of you guys, you probably don't know what autism is, and to be honest, just a few weeks ago, I didn't know what it was either. But autism is the negative belief towards people who are deaf, and it can also be the belief that those who are hearing are superior to those who are deaf. To give you an example of this would be, well, I think college students will know what I mean is say that we have a deaf classmate and this classmate needs an interpreter. And what an interpreter does is they come into your classroom and will listen to what the professor is saying and then they'll sign it to the student. Well, what if our professor pulls our classmate aside and says, you can't have your interpreter anymore because it's too distracting to the class? That would be an example of what autism is. Right now, if you guys look through the dictionary, like Webster and Oxford, you want to be able to find the definition for autism. But words you will find in the dictionary is muggle, mankini, and guyliner. So apparently being a muggle is more important to know than autism in the dictionary. But right now, autism has become such a problem because nobody knows about it. And how can they know about it? We can't look it up in the dictionary if no one's talking about it. And it's not really our fault, but our views and like when we do find out about it, it's our problem if we don't try to fix it. But in order to do that, we need to look at the history of past occurrences of autism. We need to look at what's happening today with people who are deaf, and we need to see what the negative effects that it has on these people who have experienced autism. But to start out, we're going to start out with the history of autism. Before a standard sign language was created in the United States, people that were deaf were considered to be unintelligent or stupid because there was no way to communicate with other people, and people weren't able to communicate with them. They also didn't have a community of deaf people together because we were so spread out, and I'd say a lot of deaf people didn't even know other deaf people at this time. So it did kind of create the stigma that people who were deaf were inferior to other people. But in the 19th century, or the early 19th century, American Sign Language was formed by combining some of the signs that were created by some people who were deaf along with French Sign Language. So after that, a lot of residential schools were popping up around the United States, and the first one was actually in Connecticut. But this was able to help kids who were deaf learn a language to communicate with other people, to form bonds, and it started to develop a real deaf community for people. And in 1864, Abraham Lincoln even signed a charter that founded Gallaudet University. And Gallaudet University is located in Washington, D.C., and it's the first and only liberal arts university in the world for deaf students. But unfortunately, in 1860, the International Congress of Education for the Deaf Conference, they decided that oral instruction was the new thing, and a lot of people lobbied for it there. So over the next 40 years, education was all oral instruction. And oral instruction means that deaf students in these residential schools were not allowed to use American Sign Language. They had to learn how to read lips, and they had to learn how to speak too. Also during this time, kids, they weren't allowed to use American Sign Language, so what they would do actually is in secret, they would use some signs that they've learned, and they would come up with new signs to communicate in private. So that was a good thing. That did keep some of the bond and kept the community growing for deaf children. But after the oral instruction occurred, deaf educators for deaf students was only 11%, and before this it was at 45%. And oral education for deaf students was at 80% for the next 40 years around that number. But one weird fact to actually know is about Alexander Graham Bell. You guys know that he was the first person to invent the telephone, and you guys probably also know that his mother and wife were deaf. But what you guys don't know is that he was a big lobbyist for oral instruction, which I thought was kind of strange. But let's fast forward about 80-some years to 1988. Around this time, there had been 7 presidents at Gallaudet University, and all of them were hearing. And people started getting fed up with it. I mean, of course, these kids wanted to have a deaf president represent their deaf university. But around March 6, 1988, they were looking for a new president for Gallaudet, and on that day, the board for the university chose a woman named Dr. Elizabeth Zinsser, who was the only hearing candidate out of three. And people weren't happy about that. People from all over the country came to Washington, D.C., faculty members, students, and alumni all protested for a week. This gained national attention and even worldwide attention. This was probably one of the biggest events to happen in the deaf world. And they were successful, too. After a week of protesting, marching through Washington, D.C., they finally got what they wanted. One of the board members stepped down, and so did Dr. Elizabeth Zinsser, and then they hired Dr. King Jordan, who was deaf. So that was a really good thing. But that was 26 years ago, and you guys find that, okay, that's great. We don't do that anymore. There's no one that's autistic. You're wrong. After doing a lot of research, I found a lot of stories about people who are experiencing autism today, and one woman that I came across, her name was Ashley, and in her blog she wrote about some of her experiences. And when she was growing up, she was born deaf, and around 6 years old, she got her first cochlear implant, which is what changes sound waves into electrical, and it's directly sent to your brain. So she had one of those, and around this time, her parents enrolled her in a ballet class. So she goes, and her ballet instructor actually walked up to her mother asking her to take out her cochlear implant because it was too distracting and bulky for ballet. But her parents, they stood by her side and they wouldn't do it. But for the rest of the year that she was in ballet, she would always be put in the back. But it was really sad to me to think that even people who were as young as 6 years old were experiencing autism. And one of the most surprising ones to me that I came across was another woman named Ashley Noel, and in her blog, she talked about her experiences growing up. Whenever she was a child, her parents used to tell her not to sign too dramatically in public because it was too distracting. They also even told her to not make sounds whenever she signed because she couldn't speak. And this actually turned her into an autist herself. She wrote in her blog that whenever she would be around deaf friends and hear their noises, she would think, wow, that really does sound stupid. And she even admitted that it was very autistic of her to do. But I can't really judge other people because I've even had my own autistic views. Before I'd ever even heard about what autism is, I used to, in my ASL lecture in lab, I would get very frustrated trying to communicate with other people and my deaf instructors. And it would give me negative thoughts about it. And it made me kind of an autist. But now that I'm educated about it, I can change that. And that's the problem, is that people who don't know about autism, how can they change something they've never even heard of? But all this autism that's experienced in the deaf world, it's making their self-image change. They're looking at others differently. They're even becoming autists themselves who experience autism. It's become a problem for people. Their self-worth goes down. They think that they are inferior to those who are hearing, which is, well, we don't want that ever to happen. And I'm sure that a lot of you guys are thinking that there are so many other problems that we need to deal with right now. We have Ferguson, racism, we have world hunger, abortion, we have all these things to worry about. We can't have to worry about all these small problems. But even if you do think that this is a small problem, does it make it any less important? And another thing, if it is a small problem, don't you have to fix a small problem before you fix the big problems? You can't ride a bicycle without training first. So that's one thing. But I think one of the biggest things about autism is not only that, it's unheard of, which makes it such a problem, but it's our values of the country that we live in. In the United States, we're supposed to be this big melting pot. We're supposed to embrace all other cultures and backgrounds, but we really don't. With autism, it's a culture. It's a community. It's a culture that we need to accept, that we need to embrace. We don't need to make them beneath us. Like in Gallaudet, these kids, they were told that they could do anything they wanted to, but here they were with a hearing president. We can't make these kids and people believe that they are inferior to other people who can hear. And that goes against what our foundation and values are in this country. we're supposed to accept these people. And if we still have racism and autism, discrimination, we're going to be a world filled with hate. We cannot live up to our standards. But we need to change these negative. But all in all, autism is a problem and something needs to be done about it.